Good morning, everyone in Taiwan, and good evening in America, in San Diego. And today we are very happy and honored to have President Jim Harris um, of University of San Diego to give a distinguished online lecture to us. And his title is The Responsibilities of a University in an Extraordinary Time. We are definitely in an extraordinary time. And Jim, as a number one educator, his particular things that he has the responsibilities, to special responsibilities. So very, very, very happy, looking forward to his thoughts. I hope that what he said here will be listened to and thought about by many people, many educators at this point in time. Let me say a few words first about Jim. He very especially, he's a first generation college student. Yeah, I think, and you can see that as a president of a university, but he is a first generation college student. For us in Taiwan, we always talk about to bring up the students from poor families in the rural areas. I think there's a lot to learn from him and his spirit and so on. University of San Diego is a Catholic university, a private university, but very distinguished because there are many programs. I think that in a very prominent frontier of the country, and in particular the leadership program, because this is also the specialty of Jim, and he has written a book in 2013, which is called Academic Leadership and Governance in Higher Education. And I think the second edition was published in 2022, right? Oh, one day we can translate into Chinese from you. And Jim has received many awards because his distinguished career. Just a few of them, I could mention that he was named the top 50 character building presidents in the USA. So it's very important, for character building. And just last year, 2024, he was named the top president, top best performing college president. And I think that's also a very, very, very important honor. And I would, as I said earlier, Jim would talk about his ideas and his thinking particularly in the current time, how to be an educator and how to take up the responsibilities of universities. Thank you, Jim, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ippen. Thank you. It's an honor to be with everyone today. I know many people have backgrounds as scientists, so it's a little unusual to have a social scientist like me speaking to all this august group and these future scientists that are with us today. It does remind me a little bit in the United States, we talk about children's aptitude tests, and there is one where they have a picture of four animals. And for example, a child is asked to pick one of the four animals that doesn't fit. And in this case, it feels like as a social scientist with a group of scientists that it might be something like an eagle and a hawk and a falcon, and then there's a penguin. And so today, as a social scientist with a group of scientists, I feel like I'm the penguin that is sticking out. But it is a real honor to be with you on this day. My talk today is entitled The Responsibilities of a University at an Extraordinary Time. And when I was first asked to give this lecture, we had extraordinary times at that moment, but also many things have changed in the United States, particularly in the last 3 to 4 months. And I want to share a little bit about what is happening in the United States, but give you a history of how we got to where we are today. And the beginning of my talk, I could borrow from the English playwright Shakespeare, and that is to use his title, which is What's Past is Prologue, meaning that the past sets the context for what's going on today in the United States, but it can also help us understand the choppy waters that we face in American higher education. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to hear President Theodore Hesburgh, who was the president of Notre Dame University for many, many years. And at Notre Dame, he was speaking at a group, and he told the story where there was a young man who came up to him at an alumni event, and he said to him, Father Hesburgh, when I walked across the stage and you handed me my diploma, you said two words to me that became the motto of my life and that motivated me for the rest of my life. And Father Hesburgh thought for a moment, and he said, Son, I can't remember what I possibly could have said that would be so inspirational for you. Could you remind me of what I said when you walked across the stage? And the young man said, well, you handed me my diploma and you said, keep moving, keep moving. So today, I hope to lay out a blueprint on how I think we can help restore higher education's reputation in society, particularly here in the United States. But to get there, we need to consider how we got there. And also, I'll follow Father Hesburgh's advice, which is to keep moving with my presentation. So here's the situation in the United States. We have a deeply divided nation, a president who enters the office who is controversial. This is a time when there is an ongoing debate about states' rights versus the rights of the federal government. The nation is struggling to reconcile its commitment to providing all citizens equal rights under the law, and there's a concentration of wealth within a small group of powerful white men. Now, you may think that what I'm describing is the United States today, but actually what I'm describing is the situation our nation faced in 1860 on the very eve of the American Civil War. At that time, President Abraham Lincoln was our president, and the country was mostly controlled by white slave owners. And issues concerning state rights versus the role of the federal government was a really major concern in the United States. Now, I share this information with you not to concern you that there will be a civil war in the United States again, but to put in context that during times when this nation has faced great and serious problems, in spite of those difficulties that we face as a society, time and time again, U.S. national leaders actually turned to higher education, to colleges and universities to try to solve the problems for the country and to set a new course for the direction of the university. And that opened opportunities for more people to pursue their dreams. It built our economy. And at the same time, it prepared college graduates to be engaged and active citizens in our democracy in the United States. The difference between times in past and today is that higher education was once viewed as a solution to the problems facing society, unlike today, where higher education is now viewed as actually the problem. We must remember that in the middle of the U.S. Civil War, where hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens died, the U.S. Congress and President Lincoln had the foresight to pass something called the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862. And what this did is it provided land and resources for new colleges to work to provide the workforce for a growing agricultural nation, but also to provide unprecedented access to students, students from middle and low income families, all of whom were first generation, and help prepare them for leadership roles in society. Now, these agricultural and mechanical schools called A&M today are known as land-grant research universities. And you know many of them, the great research universities in the United States, from Michigan State and Penn State, where I went to school, to Texas A&M, to the University of California. And it helped shape our nation. And it later, with the second Land Grant Act, which came in 1870s, that created what we now know as our historically Black colleges and university, or HBCUs, in the United States. So pause and think about that for a moment. In the middle of a horrific civil war, the president of the United States, President Lincoln, and Congress had the foresight and the vision to provide support funding for a new system of higher education that would really change the dynamic of our country. That may seem amazing on its surface, but in fact, investing in higher education has been a part of our history since the very founding of the nation. If you, in a pamphlet that was written in 1643 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, this is what was written about Harvard College, and I quote, "After erecting shelter, a house of worship, and the framework of government, one of the next things we longed for and looked after was to advance learning and perpetuate it into prosperity." So think about those priorities. What they were saying as settlers or as colonists at that time was that they wanted shelter, they wanted a house of worship, they wanted to form a government, and then what they wished for and created was a college, which we now know as Harvard University. And when you think about the priorities in society today, does higher education rank in the top 4? I don't think so. In other words, our founders believed that they couldn't develop a new society without the help of higher education. And they also recognized that colleges would perpetuate learning and values into the future. Now, these early colleges prepared 2 types of graduates, basically clergy and civic leaders, most of whom were white males at the time from privileged families. But over the next few centuries, new models of higher education developed, and each emerged at a different stage to provide access to new, diverse student populations, including immigrants, women, and non-traditional populations, with the idea of creating a society with liberally trained graduates who would be civically engaged to become good citizens in the United States. This expansion of this ideal was based on the access to higher education, and it's really uniquely American. At the same time that America was expanding access to college, in Europe and around the world, higher education remained mostly accessible only to the children of the wealthy and powerful families. So throughout the American history, for most of the first 200 years of our country's existence, we believe that for our society to grow and meet its true potential, the access to higher education was essential. Now, not only for economic growth and personal benefit, but also for the success of our democracy. And great leaders and thought leaders of the time, people like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Frederick Douglass, all wrote about the importance of education in advancing our democracy. And the philosopher of the late 19th century and early 20th century, John Dewey, went as far as to say, democracy has to be born anew every generation, and education is its midwife. So take, for example, the history of Catholic colleges and universities like the University of San Diego. And the common theme that emerges is that most Catholic orders decided to build colleges in urban areas. And why did they do that? To help support poor immigrant populations in the cities. Take, for example, Boston College, one of the great Catholic universities in the United States, which was created basically to help with the influx of Irish immigrants that came to Boston. Time and again across the country, the Catholic Church supported the creation of colleges to elevate these populations and made them active and engaged to help those graduates become active and engaged citizens. So this idea of serving immigrants, the idea of providing more access to immigrants and refugees is baked into the DNA of Catholic higher education. In fact, at USD, we were founded in 1949, and one of the first groups that we welcomed to our campus were Mexican citizens, the children of Mexican citizens, young women. It was a women's college at the time, would come across the border. We're that close to the Mexican-American border, would come across the border every day to receive their education. So by the time you get to the 20th century in America, whether it was a land-grant universities or the faith-based colleges, were viewed widely as providing solutions to the problems in society, educating those who came who didn't have access before, providing access to agricultural education and so forth. But that even expanded more in the 20th century. And just think about around World War II, what the United States was facing after World War II was the daunting task of 7.8 million veterans returning to the United States after the war. And there weren't enough jobs for veterans. So they faced the prospect of high unemployment after the war. And so what they decided to do, the Congress and the president at that time, President Truman, decided to do was to create the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And today it's known as the GI Bill in the United States. And that provided funding to send veterans to college. For example, I knew one veteran who he went to Cornell and he received his full education, room and board, and a stipend to go to school on the GI Bill after World War II. So this has provided us education for these veterans and expanded the capacity to accommodate new students. So colleges around the country learned how to grow and accept this non-traditional population. Now, what that meant was enrollments grew, more classrooms were needed, more laboratories were needed, more dorms were needed, and the US government saw it important, so they invested in all this. So they thought it was a very wise investment in the future. This was yet another example of how the government decided to expand access to higher education and train future leaders who were prepared not only for work, but also to be good citizens. And when you look at the curriculum of the colleges at that time, in the middle of the 20th century, it contained practical work and coursework in specific fields, as you would guess, in engineering and architecture and so forth. But all those curriculum at the time required logic, philosophy, math, science, ethics, history, civics, foreign languages. In other words, a broad liberal arts and science education, very similar to what we still offer today at the University of San Diego. So what was the result of all this investment? Well, America prospered economically and our democracy flourished. It was imperfect, but it flourished. And along the way, there were threats to our democracy that often targeted higher education and other sectors of our society. You take, for example, in the 1950s, we went through an era of McCarthyism where books were burned and banned, where college professors were attacked and blackballed. But thanks to the courageous defenders of academic freedom and free speech, higher education survived and again prospered. And then if you look in 1957, Russia sent up Sputnik, which was the satellite which beat the United States into space, and we didn't know what to do. So what did we do in response? We turned to higher education again. And they created something called the National Student Defense Fund. And what that did was to provide scientific research money directly to universities. And so it provided funding for men and women to be able to go to school in the 1950s, but also provided funding for laboratories and for the expansion of higher education, and particularly in the fields of science and engineering. In the 1960s, the US had another issue to tackle, and that was how would you provide more access to populations in the United States, particularly Black Americans who were underserved, and particularly students who came from low income and first generation students. So that led to an investment by the United States government again into something called Pell Grant funding, which later led to affirmative action programs, and that opened up higher education to all Americans, not just the wealthy. My point is that since the very beginning of our nation, higher education has been viewed as an asset, an opportunity to expand the American dream, or for all Americans, and equally important to prepare graduates to be competent in their fields of study, but also as well as becoming well-informed citizens in a democracy. And all this investment was thought to strengthen the American economy, advance scientific knowledge, and position the United States as an economic powerhouse and the defender of freedom as an international peacekeeper. So what happened? How do we lose our way and become viewed, we being higher education, as the problem? Or as our new vice president, J.D. Vance, recently described American higher education, and I quote, as places where the professors are the enemy. And how do we get here? Instead of being a society's solution to problems, we've now become society's problem. I believe three things have happened. I think, first of all, we walked away from our responsibility of preparing students to be engaged citizens, which made higher education more of a private right instead of a public good. Secondly, we allowed rankings and the pursuit of prestige to cloud our understanding of the true purpose of higher education, which has created a more homogeneous model of that is expensive and also unsustainable. And most importantly, I think we forgot to be mission-centered, to understand who we are as universities, to stick to our core values and to how to express those values to the world. So let's unpack each of these ideas. First of all, as I outlined earlier, American higher education until very recently was much more viewed as a public good as it was a private right, or equally as important. In other words, to our nation, the leaders that were elected saw the return on investment that was self-evident. Even today, it should be as well. For example, just listen to these results. College-educated students or citizens in the United States earn more money than non-college educated citizens. So they earn on average in a lifetime $1 million US more than someone who did not go to college. This means more tax dollars to support government programs and infrastructure and more expendable cash to drive the economy. College-educated adults are on average healthier than their non-college educated peers. They exercise more, they're less likely to smoke, and they just have healthier lifestyles in general, putting less of a burden on the American healthcare system, which has its own set of problems. College-educated adults are more scientifically literate, and they have a greater understanding of the value of public health initiatives and the value of scientific research. They understand the investment is important. And maybe most importantly, college-educated adults are more likely to vote, participate in civic activities, and more likely to study issues that are on the ballots than those who don't attend college. So you would think that all these benefits would be enough to motivate elected officials to support higher education. But I would argue that we've lost the narrative. There's been a move over the years towards more of an emphasis on an individual's right to an education and the benefit that accrues to the individual person rather than the public good. And that has led these people to lose faith, led people across the United States to lose faith in the purpose of higher education. And when education becomes viewed as an individual right rather than the public good, it becomes a problem, or in our case today, the enemy. Let me give you a case in point. So at USD, we have a program, an incredible program called the Student Success Program, which focuses on individuals who are first-generation students who come from traditionally low-income families and underserved communities, both locally and across the nation. As scientists, you might be aware of one of these programs, which is called the McNair Scholars Program, which is designed to encourage more students to be able to go from low-income and underrepresented population in the United States to go on to graduate school, particularly in the STEM fields, to be able to earn their master's and PhDs. Many of these major research universities in the United States have these programs, and we refer to them as TRIO programs. And when you look at the demographics of this group, mostly low-income families, with the majority being students of color, it is easy for someone to attack it in the United States as an affirmative action or what we call a diversity, equity, and inclusion program because of the individuals who are involved. But at USD, for example, our student success students graduate at a rate better than our average student population, greater than the rest of the population. And we estimate that for every dollar that we invest as a university in these students and that the government invests, there's a 13-to-1 investment in the future. So the money comes back in earnings, taxes paid, and community served. But our critics would say these programs shouldn't exist and that they take away from the rest of the student population by focusing on so many resources in a certain population. Now, according to our data, our SSS graduates are more likely to go to graduate school, earn degrees in fields desperately needed in our society, engineering, science. They also go on to be accountants. They pursue their PhDs and so forth. But they're also more likely to enter what we would call in the social sciences, the helping fields. They're more likely to be counselors, more likely to go into nursing, social work, and medicine, and other desperately needed professions. And that really is where the return on investment for an entire nation is most important, and really where you see that value coming to term. So now let's turn our attention to ratings and rankings. And we have ours, and we have many more that we could show you about the campus. And what I'm probably most proud of is that we get some of the top rankings in the country for our work around conservation, around our commitment to the environment, a top green college, number 3 for the best quality of life for students to attend our campus. And that's the quality of our faculty, the quality of the educational components, and the overall well-being of our students. So one of the best schools for making an impact. But overall on the right-hand side, also by the Wall Street Journal, it's just simply one of the best 50 universities in the country. Now, let me give you an example of something that happened. In 2017, we received our first ranking, and we have a beautiful campus. And if you ever have an opportunity, I'd love to have you come to our campus, and we'll arrange for a tour for you to take a look at it. It is gorgeous. And in 2017, we get ranked as the most beautiful campus in America by the Princeton Review. And that year, we invested $6 million from a donor to upgrade our campus and make it even more beautiful, more space, more walking around space, and so forth. And the following year, what happened? Were we number 1? No, we dropped to number 6 somehow, and we couldn't quite figure out whatever happened. For example, for many years, we touted that we're the youngest university because we were founded in 1949. We're the youngest university in the top 100 universities ranked in the U.S. News and World Report, which is a big ranking system in the United States. And over the years, we've improved every metric. This year's first class is the highest GPA for a freshman class in history. It's our most diverse class. The past few years, we've achieved our highest retention rates and graduation rates in the history of the university. And our low-income and Pell Grant students graduated at a rate 30% higher than the national average. Over the past decade, we've invested $250 million in our infrastructure and scientific buildings and new business school. We had our lowest tuition increase compared over the last decade compared to all of our peer groups, but we dropped out of the top 100. And because U.S. News and World Report changed the criteria for what it meant to be a national university. So consequently, we were bumped out by older and wealthier universities that used to be classified as regional comprehensive universities. Of course, what does that mean for us? And what does that mean for the system is that the critics came out and wanted to know what did we do wrong? And we didn't do anything wrong. We actually got better in every possible field. Well, let me give you another example. As you know, the U.S. News and World Report also ranks graduate schools and professional schools in business and law, medicine, and so forth. So 2 years ago, we received our biggest gift in the history of the university at that time, a $50 million United States, worth $50 million United States dollars to name our business school, the Canals School of Business, after Don and Ellie Canals, who are two philanthropists who are incredibly generous and helped us to do this. And what happened was the next year we dropped in our rankings. And what we believe happened was because of our name, that we are no longer the University of San Diego Business School. We're now the Canals School of Business at the University of San Diego. So when these rankings went out, the people who were filling them out didn't see our name. So then our business dean, Tim Keene, explained to me that they figured out what went wrong. So what did they do? What did we do? We put more money in marketing and to make sure that the other deans knew about our name change. And so we sponsored the next academic conference. We actually had a reception where we provided drinks and food and so forth. And what happened the next time the rankings came out, we jumped up 30 spots because now people know who we are. This is, 2 years ago, the Wall Street Journal put out its list of the top 500 college universities in the United States. And apparently we didn't have enough alumni fill it out to rank. So we weren't even ranked in the top 500. And that upset our board members, upset me, and I didn't know quite what had happened. So this year we paid closer attention to the Wall Street Journal process and had a staff member shepherd the process to make sure people filled out the surveys and we got legitimate information. And what was the result? We ended up in the top 50 universities in the country. And we even outdid our private competitors here in Southern California. Like we were ranked ahead of the University of Southern California, which we were delighted to see. But I want us all to pause and think for a moment. I mean, what does this do? And what does this say about college and universities? Instead of being hyper-focused on our mission of teaching and learning, of research and student success, and preparing students to be good citizens, we're spending time, we're spending money, and we're spending human resources in pursuing the golden ring of higher rankings. So what chasing rankings has done, in my opinion, is force all institutions to pursue this at the cost of investing in innovation and not to pursue new models of higher education. I think this diminishes the uniqueness of institutions in America, and by making them conform to a model of success that only a certain set of schools will ever be able to achieve. So the more money you have as an endowment, the longer you've been around, the higher your rankings will be because you just have those resources to be able to do it. And schools that have started more recently or don't have those kind of resources will never be able to be competitive as they are ranked. And so I think about a place like, you might not be familiar, but there's a place called Southern New Hampshire University, which was a small liberal arts college in New England. And if it tried to compete with like schools, and there are many great liberal arts colleges up in New England, you can bet that it may not be in existence today, but thanks to the courage of a president about 20 years ago by the name of Paul LeBlanc, he created an entirely different version of higher education and put all the courses online. My point is that rankings discourage innovation. The fear of losing a ranking or rating if you try something new or unique. And Paul LeBlanc was not afraid to lose that ranking. He actually wanted to create a new system of higher education. And if we're not able or interested or able to move forward with a unique model, it homogenizes the entire sector and justifies the mission creep that we see in American higher education. Everyone wants to be the next highest institution in terms of its offerings. So how do we change this, especially when the rankings and the ratings aren't going to go away? One thing we could do is to celebrate and reward innovation. That could come from the federal government. It could come from foundations. It could come from the ranking services. We should reward schools who have increased traditional measurements, retention, graduation rates, success in certain fields, but also elevate and support those who have found innovative ways to make higher education more accessible and keep the cost lower. Those that have improved social mobility, where you take more people from first generation and lower income that are able to move up in society because of their education, by supporting more marginalized populations, and by rewarding innovation for innovation's sake. Now, let's reward college and universities that find new ways to improve mental health and the well-being of their students. Let's reward universities for their impact on the local community, not just the global community. So while we're an international university with students from over 80 countries, all 50 states, 3 territories, we also want to have an impact on our local community. And one organization that does that in the United States is something called the Washington Monthly Magazine. And what they do is they recognize college universities that do well in preparing students who are committed to their local community, and those who have helped on the social mobility piece that I talked about before. So imagine how each of our institutions in America would change, and how much better they would be in terms of the eyes of elected officials and also the public if we rewarded work that made differences in our communities, rather than chasing the traditional outcomes that you see in other ranking services. Now, this brings me to my third point. How do we return higher education to focus on developing graduates who are compassionate, critical thinkers, problem solvers, who understand the old biblical verse of "to whom much is given, much is required"? In other words, graduates who understand that higher education is not a personal right, but a privilege, and actually that every college graduate has a responsibility to give back to their community. To get there, I think we must focus again on what used to be considered the 3 C's of higher education, and this goes back to the early 20th century and some of the educational writers, this idea of competency, of character, and of citizenship. So to make sure that every college graduate is prepared to be productive members of society, while also developing the skills to be helpful in the workforce. So how do we ensure that college and university graduates are as compassionate and contemplative individuals, equipped to understand right from wrong and to respect the dignity of every human being? And finally, we need to prepare students to graduate equipped to accept their role as engaged citizens who are informed voters, good neighbors, and citizens who seek to create a sense of community wherever they live across the world. My son actually came home one day. I used to talk a lot about the 3 C's. And he said, "Dad, I have my report card. You're going to be very happy with my report card. You know how you love the 3 C's." I said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, you'll be very happy with what I have on my report card today." But let's unpack each of the 3 C's. The first is competency. And it's often thought of having certain skills and prepare you for the workforce and for your first job and perhaps for your career. And over the century, our higher education system has moved more and more towards vocational approach to higher education. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. We need people who are technically prepared and trained to work in a profession. But what most employers are asking for today, when we look at the surveys, are critical thinkers. They're looking for problem solvers, and they want people who can work in diverse groups. And these are the skills that are honed by not taking one more engineering course in a particular field, but rather by students being liberated by their education. You know, students need exposure to working in groups. They need to solve complex problems and develop the competency of recognizing what they don't know and understanding on how to find an answer. So just think about the field of computer science. By the time you train a student in a particular software package or hardware system, within 2 years of graduation, those systems are obsolete. What students need is to understand the underlying principles behind those systems and acquire the critical skills to figure out what comes next. In other words, we are teaching students how to think, not what to think. Now, in America, there's actually, unfortunately, some members of our Congress and in government who feel that the United States are teaching people what to think. And that means in terms of the political ideology in our country. And that has made higher education a target. And I will return to that topic in just a moment. So students need the skills to work in diverse groups. Whether our elected officials want to accept it or not, our world is very connected, and more so than ever before. And we all compete in a global economy. And that requires the skills and expertise to work and connect with people from different cultures, backgrounds, and identities. That is why attracting a diverse student population is so important to us, as I mentioned earlier, having such a diverse student population on our campus. Now, we have students also from different faith traditions, identities, ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and we believe the best environment for students to learn We also encourage and support study abroad, and over 60% of our students in any 1 year or over their 4-year period of time, I should say, at the university will have an experience abroad. And we're one of the top 10 schools in America for that. Now, what about the development of character? About many years ago, I worked at a university, and one of their presidents from the 19th century was a former general who became a university president. His name was Theodore Hyatt. And he wrote this about character. He said, if you lose your money, you lose nothing. If you lose your health, you've lost something. But if you lose your character, all is lost. So character still matters. And it may not seem so when we watch what's happening in the United States and around the world in terms of reality stars or TV or elected officials who seem to have no moral compass. But I believe they are the exception, not the norm. And that most of us want to be able to trust our fellow citizens, our national leaders, and see them as honest brokers of the truth. And in this age of artificial intelligence, there's never been a more important time to understand, I think, what it means to be human. We want and need leaders who are compassionate, who respect the dignity of others. This is why every college student should be exposed to great literature, to poetry, should be nurtured to be a contemplative individual, to appreciate beauty, to wrestle with moral dilemmas, and read about how others have struggled with the great issues of their times. And in my opinion, to be exposed to all the great religious traditions and to learn that they all share the same one truth, and that is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Higher education has a place and a role to play in the development of character in students we educate, and we should not shy away from that responsibility. Now, what about citizenship? In my opinion, we need to return to preparing graduates who understand not only their individual rights, but also their responsibilities to democracy and society as a whole. This requires students to study the social sciences and the humanities. It requires universities and colleges to ask their students to go beyond the walls of their campus and to engage in real issues facing society. And I think the best place to do that is in an urban environment. Some of the greatest thinkers of all time believed it was essential that a good education, that students be directly exposed to society. Take, for example, the 19th century poet and educator Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who asked the question of his fellow colleagues when he was professor at Harvard, and I quote, "Where should the scholar live? In solitude or in society? In the green stillness of the country where he can hear the heart of nature beat, or in the gray, dark town where he can hear and feel the throbbing heart of man?" His answer to this question, in the gray, dark town. By directly exposing our students to the issues facing society, they learn things that are not as simple as they may seem. At USD, our students serve in places such as Father Joe's Villages, which serves the homeless. And by doing so, they learn about a woman who and her family living on the street may not be mentally ill or a drug addict or unwilling to work. It may be that they're living in the street because she's not making a living wage and be able to pay, she's living from paycheck to paycheck with no safety net. It is by having our students visit the Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, which is right on the border with Mexico, where we have migrants that come across the border. It's where people like Dominique and her 2 young children, who I met at the parish, who just came to the United States just a week before on a temporary visa to get away from the cartel that threatened to take her family. And it's by doing this, it's by doing service projects, for example, to build a community garden, because many of the people who live in urban areas don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And so for it's our students to help these local citizens be able to have access and produce and work in these actual vegetable gardens in our community. These are the lessons that students need to learn while they're in college if we want them to become informed citizens. It's one of the things to watch. It's one thing to watch TV and say, hey, send all the immigrants back to Mexico. It's another thing to go to that migrant shelter I told you about, meet Monique and meet her children and look into her eyes and hear her story. Community-based learning and led by a very qualified instructor is one of the most powerful ways for a student to learn. We have a number of studies in the social sciences that will prove this, that the students learning what they're learning in the classroom, when it's complemented by the work in the community, they learn so much more. But it takes time, it takes preparation, it takes the teachers more to do this. And so the universities have to support this by providing more resources to our faculty to be able to accomplish this. Now, this is why I think artificial intelligence is not a threat. but rather a great opportunity for higher education to return focusing on competency, character, and citizenship. Just think of the future of AI could provide students with the content of the subjects they're studying whenever it's convenient for them. They don't have to be in a classroom with a faculty member. It can be flipped. And instead of spending time being the purveyors of knowledge, as we typically are as faculty members, we can focus our attention on being curators of knowledge and spend time engaging students in the practical application of ideas and concepts through community service, community learning, undergraduate research, and other high-impact practices. It also allows faculty to have more time to discuss some of the biggest challenges facing humanity with their students. Of course, it's one thing for a university to ask the faculty to do this and the students to do this. It's another thing to make sure that universities be good neighbors themselves. And how do universities become good neighbors? By doing the heavy lifting of this work with an open mind and listening to the community and having hard discussions about the university's past. For example, Georgetown University spent a year discussing its history in connection to slavery and making amends for the descendants of those slaves. It's by supporting local community businesses and helping them gear up to be vendors at our institutions. So we have small businesses. We want to help them be prosperous in our community, add more jobs to the economy, help the local neighborhoods, but we need to help them be successful as businesses. It's by nurturing and cultivating innovative ideas and helping faculty and students take those ideas to the market and developing new models of business and helping them move that outside as they create that new business. And in times of desperation, such as the global pandemic, it's in these times that places like USD, and we did this, we had to open our campus to provide vaccines and healthcare to local citizens. So the university becomes the focus for the local community to survive those kinds of catastrophic kind of events. This is what it means to be a good citizen as a university and what it looks like to prepare students to be productive, engaged citizens and compassionate citizens in our democracy. So what about the current state of higher education? I'll end with a few comments there. It's struggling by all accounts, and we are under attack in ways in which I would have never guessed even just a few years ago. It's clear that the current federal administration under President Trump wishes to dismantle some of the fundamental and foundational elements of what has enabled the U.S. to be the envy of the world with regard to our institutions of higher learning. To say dismantle things such as academic freedom and the right of universities to determine on academic grounds what to teach, how to teach, and by whom. As university leaders, we must defend the principle that universities must remain centers of open inquiry, where scholars may pursue the truth, no matter where it takes them without fear of administrative or government interference. And the free exchange of ideas is essential to the success of any academic enterprise, and we must defend it vigorously, no matter what the cost. In fact, a group of us just today put out a letter, 150 college university presidents from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia and Brown and others to major research universities, to community colleges, University of San Diego and others. We signed a national letter to the federal government asking for them to defend academic freedom and also to come to the table to have conversations about the future of research in the United States. And we also believe one of the greatest ways to encourage the free exchange of ideas is in a setting with a diverse group of people who bring different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences to that learning experience and environment. So let me just stop and say, I don't oppose, nor do my presidential colleagues around the country, legitimate government oversight, but we do oppose undue government intervention and the incredible overreach by the federal government in the recent attacks on places like Harvard and Columbia and other elite universities. It's shocking and appalling. Much of this government interference has been framed as ending anti-Semitism on campus. And I would say, in all fairness, that all universities could do more to ensure their campuses are places where all people feel free to pursue their research and studies without fear of being singled out because of their belief systems. But it's one thing to work with an institution to develop practices and protocols to make a university safer for everyone to live, learn, and work. There's entirely another matter when the government tries to coerce universities by withholding research funding or funding to students. When this overreach first started appearing around the country, I believe many of us were in shock and disbelief of what was going on. And thanks to the courageous efforts of our national associations, we're now starting to move in the right direction, as I mentioned earlier, by trying to speak up and start talking about this collectively as colleges and universities across the country. Also, I think presidents are finding their voices and footing, both as individuals and collectively, to defend the academy And this will require using and defending the rule of law and pursue all legal means to maintain our rights as institutions of higher learning. It also requires sacrifice, both financially and personally, as a few elite universities will likely need to forego federal funding in the short run, and individual institutional leaders will have to withstand the pressure from government, from donors, from alumni, and other constituents, if we want to secure the freedoms associated with American higher education over these past 3 centuries. You know, the American civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, once said in a speech in the National Cathedral in 1968, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." We all need to have faith that our society and that American higher education specifically will find its way and bend towards justice for all. I believe in the power and the importance of education, that education may be the single most important factor in determining whether our democracy fails or flourishes. So you may say, listen, Jim, our times are different. We have AI and we have social media to deal with, and the spread of misinformation is real. But misinformation has been part of our democratic experiment for over 250 years. Even at the start of the Republic, there were fake news pamphlets that were distributed to the public by unethical peddlers of misinformation that have always been and always will be a problem. So what do? Those of us committed to lives of service to higher education. You know, over 30 years ago, I had lunch at Harvard, or I was at a program at Harvard where I ended up teaching for 20 years. And I got to meet the educational sociologist, David Reisman. And he had done a study on a group of college and university presidents and what made them to be successful leaders and what were the key ingredients. And so we had lunch with him one day, a group of us, and a new president, she asked Dr. Reisman, so what can I do to guarantee that I will be a successful university president? And he looked at her and without pausing, he says, be the living embodiment of the mission of the institution you serve. So how do we get out of the mess that we're in right now as academic leaders at universities around the country? I think leaders need to take the role, as do faculty members, to embody the mission of the institution where they serve. If you're at a research institution, you should be focused on research. If you're a liberal arts education university, you need to focus on the liberal arts. It's important to the fabric of our higher education system in America to have a diverse group of organizations, and we need to protect and support the unique features of each of those institutions. This is a place for a Research One university like a Harvard or a Cal Berkeley in our country, but it's also important that you have the San Diego Community College system. It's important that you have the large public Cal State system. It's important that you have small private liberal arts colleges and art research 2 universities like the University of San Diego. Each university has a unique mission and plays an important role in the ecosystem of our local communities. And each institution has the same responsibilities. And we can't do this in a moment as to hunker down and to hide away from everything, but we have to step up and support what we're proud of and what we've done over many centuries. We have a responsibility to step into the arena, to call out things that are unjust and are not in keeping with our values. At USD, our mission identifies us as a contemporary Catholic university committed to the liberal arts, anchored on an international border. And we believe that the encyclical written by Pope Francis, God rest his soul, Laudato Si, or On Care of Our Common Home, is a guiding document for us. And so we have guidelines as to where we speak out and take action on issues that are not aligned with our mission. And this is directly aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. In the case of USD, we need to advance knowledge and prepare our graduates for the world. We must also demand the fair and just treatment of immigrants and refugees. We need to back initiatives aimed at supporting the sustainability of our planet, and we need to care for the most vulnerable in our society. These are our core beliefs and the work that we do as a Catholic research university. As we say in our mission statement, we seek to create a more inclusive, sustainable, and hopeful world. In our vision statement, we go even further, and we say we want to educate citizens who confront humanity's challenges by fostering peace, by working for justice, and leading with love. Now, these are challenging times, and I know it can feel overwhelming for all of us, particularly those of us who are leaders on college campuses around the world. But we need everybody to step into the arena and to take on and defend the mission of higher education. And I want to leave you with one last thought, and that is when we're all feeling overwhelmed by the attacks on the academy, we should ask ourselves this question, and that is, maybe our paths are harder because our calling is higher. Each of us needs to answer the call for our communities, for our nation, for our world. we need to accept our higher calling and ask ourselves a question originally asked by over 1,000 years ago by the Jewish rabbi and philosopher Hillel the Elder. If not now, when? If not you, then who? So I want to thank you again for this opportunity to speak to you, for the honor to be a part of this National Central University series. And please, I can be open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. I think this is a wonderful lecture, I would say. I think that you're addressing not just to the Taiwanese education community, but also to a much wider community. I think that we are open to, we still have some time for question. I'm sure Jim would be happy to talk to you. Anyone, if you just turn on your mic and or you raise your hand, and we could let you talk. So, Jim, let me start first. You mentioned about confidence, character, and citizenship, and you must be very experienced in how do you do that, because you have only say 3 or 4 years for his undergraduate student, and you want to change them once they step out of your the door.
How to do that within a short period of time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think having developed a curriculum that incorporates what we call, and I think you would as well call, high impact practices. So what are the best teaching methods? What are the best ways? And those high impact practices include some of the things I talked about, like studying abroad, having the opportunity to have undergraduate research where they engage with a faculty member one-on-one, or maybe just 2 students and 1 faculty member on an important research project. It could be in sciences or social sciences. I think it's in community building and having an opportunity to learn in the community, hands-on experiential learning. I think it's also based on having learning communities that we have on our campus, that we bring students together, we start them out, and then having senior capstone projects. So even in a 3 to 4 year period of time, no matter what discipline, and we have engineering and science and nursing and all the different disciplines, in that period of time, you can accomplish that if you have a set curriculum and a plan that includes the kinds of courses that would have you ask some of those deep questions, questions of ethical concern, questions about moral dilemmas, learning about what other past individuals in your field have studied and have had to deal with. And you need to have that built into the curriculum. It's one thing to be like, as a historian, when I could have taken 4 more courses in history, but I think I probably benefited more from English literature and philosophy and some of the other courses that I took along the way that helped develop a fuller picture of things. I think that's what I go. How about you? What do you think?
Well, the problem with us here is that the education system in Taiwan is we are very much technology oriented. We train. I mean, the most popular the profession is to get a job at the TSMC, where they got a very high pay and so on. And they need a lot of engineers and scientists for that. And so that's almost the one of the main goals of the students. And but then anyway, we always want to say that it's important for the science student, engineering student to have more humanitarian or humanity training education. But then the problem is how to make the message across to them. Yeah, I mean, I think that after, even though they're very specialized in certain things, but as you said, as a citizen, you have to learn, you have to experience far more things than you have learned just 1 or 2 things. Yeah.
Right. And having that experience of dealing with, and what we found from our employers, and we're a biotech community here in San Diego, a large biotech and pharmaceutical community. And what we found is that they like the competency and technology skills that our students bring when they are hired. But what they discover is that after a few years, that what they really want are critical thinkers. They want people who know how to work in groups, people who know how to work with people from different backgrounds, because we have a global clientele and it's a global economy out there. So you better know how to work. Our students, for example, all have to take a second language in order to graduate. Now, many of them take Spanish, but some are taking Mandarin, some are taking, different languages from around the world, Russian and so forth, in order to be competitive.
So language, of course, is important. But then one thing is, of course, how do you teach critical thinking? I mean, this is a method of doing things, right? Not you cannot ask a student, oh, you go to a seminar and on critical thinking, after an hour, he will be a critical thinker. I think it's not.
No, I think it takes it takes great teaching, and it takes the opportunities, whether it's in science or it's in other fields, to have that, to be able to discuss with almost like the tutorial system that they had in the old English system of having more one-on-one experience with those students. But we have to challenge students and give them experiences in the community where they have to solve a problem, right? You have to solve a problem. It's one thing to solve a problem on the board. It's another to work with humans to try to solve the problem. And then we also have created a system on our campus where students come up with an idea for a business or come up idea with an innovative approach to something. And we've created a small business development center. We have an incubator program. And so they're again and again put in these situations where they have to solve a problem in order to move to the next level. And so I think it's through experiential learning that they really do, the application of that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, but when I was, preparing your talk last couple months, I have been thinking uh, to ask you, have you any in cooperative in program with Taiwan universities? Um, I mean, would you be interested in that?
We absolutely would be interested in that. And I'm sure we have faculty that already have individual faculty connections to
Mm.
Taiwan universities, but we'd love to have a greater relationship and maybe a more formal program for the students to come here and for our students to go there. And exchange of scholars would be very important to us in a variety of fields.
I noticed that there's one Professor Yi in your college, in your university, doing hydrology, and his family came from Taiwan. So I think maybe one day I would contact him. He may be
Yeah,
interested.
please. Yes. Yeah, we'd love to. And I can put you in touch with the dean as well.
Mm. Um, so anything else you I mean, after this lecture, and that anything that you think that you should add to that, or think to ask the people here?
I'm just honored to be with you. Thank you for listening, and would love to have a greater relationship with the universities in Taiwan. Have you come back and visit? Have your colleagues that were on this call today come and visit in a
Mm.
variety of our different schools. I know that we'd have faculty that welcome with warm and open arms, and we want to develop a greater relationship.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I hope that to see you soon, and then maybe sometime we could find a way to invite you to visit Taiwan.
Would
Yeah,
love that. I'd be
yeah,
honored.
yeah.
Thank you for
Thank you so
inviting.
much. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.